Hi, it's Laura Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. This is my quite late, as per usual, VR to the tag All About Tarot 2022, which was started by Simon over at the Hermit's Cave. I will link to Simon's video below. I've been really enjoying people's VRs to this tag, and so that's why I thought I would make my own, late though it is. There are, I think, 13 questions, so without further ado, into the questions. The first question is, what is your first tarot deck and how did you encounter it? So my first tarot deck, which I still have, I don't have the box though, is the Jonathan D tarot pack. These are the backs, very shiny, very purple. And this deck is kind of a weird mix of, Pippish minors, Marseille minors, minors with a hint of Smith Waite in them, purely pips. It's color coded by suit. And this deck was gifted to me by my mom and grandma. And I'm pretty sure that they just found it in a, bookstore, like a chain bookstore in the small town that I grew up in. And that was, in my early to early mid-teens that I was gifted it. Some of my relatives on that side, on my grandmother's family, were rather, playing card readers. I didn't grow up around those relatives, but it's something that I was aware of, and certainly, when I showed a bit of interest in tarot, I was, happily given this deck. And it's not a good deck to have as your first deck because it's all over the place in terms of the kind of systems and symbolism. But I do like the art style in this deck, and I'm glad to have had it because here I am 20 years later, roughly, talking about tarot with you all. So that's how I encountered it, was as a gift. And I rediscovered this deck in the back of a closet at my parents' house. And it's one of the first videos I ever made on this channel, was showing this, having found it. And it was in a pouch that I had put it in, this little kind of velvety pouch with a long string. And so I had to do a little bit of research to find out what the name of the deck even was, because I had long forgotten, but it is the Jonathan D Tarot Pack, gift from the family. The second question is your last deck and how your tastes have changed since your first. Okay. So I don't know if this is going to be very helpful in terms of how my tastes have changed since the first, but the most recent deck that I purchased was actually the Tarot Hokusai, which is by Osvaldo Menegazzi of Il Meneghello. It's a majors only deck featuring the artwork of the great artist Hokusai. I certainly wouldn't have known who Hokusai was, when I was a teenager with my first deck. I also wouldn't have known anything about the wonderful world of indie tarot decks, and creators like Il Meneghello. So my, I would say, immersion kind of in tarot culture, if we can say that, has definitely changed a lot since, just having a deck and being isolated and looking at the cards on my own and the guidebook. I'm now aware much more of the decks that are coming out and the decks that are created. I wouldn't have bought a majors only deck when I was first learning. They didn't appeal to me for much of my tarot journey, and even now I only have a very few of them. But one like this that feels really special, I can really appreciate. And, if you've had an Il Meneghello deck, the quality and the attention to detail and the truly handmade sense of their decks that is just amazing. I feel like how my tastes have changed is also not really that represented by the Jonathan D Tarot being my first deck, because I didn't really pick it, right? It was gifted to me, and I don't think it was necessarily gifted to me because my mom and grandma thought, wow, now this deck is totally Laura's style. It was more like, this is what's available. But in terms of how my tarot taste has changed, I would say that now that I have worked with a lot of different decks, I have a much stronger sense of what my tarot tastes are. I think that when I was first exploring having more than one deck, I felt really like I wanted to experiment and try, different styles and see what I think about, an animal deck, and see what I think about a Marseille deck, and see what I think about a landscape deck, or whatever it is. And some decks inevitably I kind of clicked with more than others. Some I feel more drawn to than others to actually work with once I have them. And so now I would say that my tastes have kind of not solidified in the sense that there's no flexibility or like they'll never change. But I now have a very good sense when I see a deck, whether it's one that I like or don't like, but not even just that. Also, if it's a deck that I like the looks of, like, would I actually use it? I would say that those tastes have definitely, really established themselves now. So that's something that I think has come from learning that could only really happen by trying reading with different kinds of decks. I, for a long time, only had the one deck. I didn't know how differently different decks would read at all until I had more than one. So that's an interesting thing, I think. And I like, exploring different decks, of course. Number 3, the third question is, why tarot? Why do you read tarot, and or why do you prefer it to other kinds of divination if you do? I would say that what I like about tarot is the structure of the tarot deck. I find myself more inclined towards types of divination that have quite a strong structure. So something like geomancy or Ogham. I also really like both of those. They have, a very set structure. There are only so many Ogham fid in the Ogham, right? There's 20 or 25, depending on whether you work with the Forfeda, and that's it, right? And every Ogham set, whether that's a deck or some other kind of tool, is going to have that. Geomancy, is a very set system, and I think of tarot that way as well. I really struggled with oracle decks initially. I didn't get any kind of oracle deck as a kind of deck that doesn't really have much of a system until 2016, and then it was another year and a half before I got a second one. The first one I got was the Earthbound Oracle, which I have and love. But I really like that structure of tarot, geomancy, and Ogham. And what tarot, of course, gives me as a system that Ogham and geomancy do not necessarily, or certainly don't to the same extent, is that I get to appreciate so many different interpretations and different artwork in different tarot decks. Whereas Ogham, yes, there are different Ogham decks, including, this one that I made, an arboreal Ogham, but the Ogham themselves, look how they look. They're effectively a tally system. And most of the tools that I use to read Ogham just have those markings on them, and that's really it. So there's not the really wide range of artwork that tarot provides. And the same thing with geomancy. It's sets of dots. I read geomancy very predominantly with dice. There are certainly other ways to read geomancy. I just recently got, I'll show you since they're right here. I did recently get these geomancy sticks. And so there's 4 of them, but they each have the single on one side and the double on the other for casting and getting your geomancy figure. But again, this, you're not going to get a bunch of different artists' interpretations of this, right? It's a 1 and a 2. So tarot, I love for having that system that different artists get to play inside and interpret and bring to life in their different ways that I get to appreciate. I love that about tarot. And it's such a visual system to work with as a result, right? You get to lose yourself in the artwork and think about what particular symbols in a particular work of art might mean to you in the context of a reading in a very different way, I find, than when I'm looking at geomancy figures, for example. Question number 4. Tarot pet peeves. Certainly any kind of stereotyping when it comes to representation in tarot pisses me off. Tokenism, or any of that kind of either lack of diversity or diversity done really badly, that is way too commonly an issue. That's a problem. I will also say another tarot pet peeve, and it's weird, like the language of pet peeve always feels like trivial to me. Like a pet peeve is something that's not that serious, but I've chosen to answer this question as like things in tarot that piss you off or that piss me off. Shitty representation is the first one. The other one that really irks me is wasteful packaging. I really, really don't like excessive plastic packaging in particular. The big piece of plastic with the hole in it that the cards sit in the top. No. When cards are in a tuck box and the tuck box is wrapped in plastic and then the cards inside the tuck box are also wrapped in plastic, Tarot of the Cat people, no. I hate this. I really hate it when I see it. And I love to see the opposite, which is when creators are trying to do more eco-friendly ways of producing decks. So that's my tarot pet peeves. Number 5, favorite tarot spread. I don't want this answer to sound like arrogant or something, but my favorite tarot spread is a tarot spread that I've designed with the question in mind. I feel like there is no greatest tarot spread, and for me, for a tarot spread to work, the positions need to speak very directly to components of the question that I'm asking. Right? Sometimes I'll use a tarot spread that's not really specific in that sense. It'll be just kind of a 9-card box or something like that, and I'll read the cards all together without a specific spread position for each individual card. But if I'm working with more specific spread positions, my favorite spread is one that I've made to speak to the question, because otherwise I find that it doesn't answer the question as well as it might. Like, it's kind of go-to different kinds of spreads. Like, most questions that I want to ask the tarot would never be answered, for example, by a past, present, future spread. They just wouldn't. So I don't really use those kind of standard spreads a lot. I do really like, for spreads that I didn't make myself, I do really like the spreads in the back of this book, the Fifth Spirit Tarot Guide, Charlie Claire Burgess's book, which are inspired by the different signs of the zodiac. These spreads are really good, and I hope that when the deck goes mass market, which it is soon, that those are kept, or that there's some nice spreads that Charlie has come up with in whatever book gets put out mass market. I also love, there's a spread that's a kind of elemental check-in spread created by Kelly Fitzgerald of The Truth and Story, and I really like that spread as well. Those are my favorite tarot spreads. Number 6 is your preferred tarot system. I think of tarot as a system, and then things like Smith-Waite or Marseille as kind of variations on that system, more so than I think of them as systems separately from each other, if that makes sense. And in terms of a preferred tarot system, or preferred tarot lineage, or tarot approach, I guess, I do tend to gravitate to decks that deviate pretty far from the Smith-Waite imagery, but also aren't really Marseille decks either. I like decks that really do their own thing. But in terms of, the way I think that this question is intended, I would say Smith-Waite system and Marseille system, or Pips, I like equally. I don't do Thoth. Number 7, tarot rituals. I don't have too many tarot rituals, really. I do like, and it may not really feel like much of a ritual, but whenever I have a new deck, I do like to just go through it and look at each card. It's nothing fancy, but I like to just kind of curl up on the sofa, and take the cards out. And if If it's a second-hand deck and it's shuffled, then I'll put them back in order. Or if it comes, in a particular order as a new deck, then I'll just leave it like that and go through each card individually and just look at them and think about some initial first impressions, see what kinds of themes I can pick out, see what I think about particular representations, and just kind of explore the deck without doing a reading with it or anything, just looking. And I feel like now, increasingly, when I buy a deck, I've already seen every card, at least online or in a video or something. Like I will have seen a flip through or a walkthrough, or I'll see every card on a Kickstarter, wherever the deck is coming from. So it's not necessarily that I'm surprised in this process, but I do like to just take that time to just sit, and it's like sitting and saying hello, right? Going through each one. And I might be thinking about what other, oracle decks that the deck might pair well with or things like that, but really just appreciating the deck and getting to know it a little bit. Number 8, how do you use tarot, introspection, divination, etc.? Both of those, certainly. I think of tarot as helpful for introspection in the sense of, giving me something to build my thoughts around, if that makes sense, to frame my thoughts around, to prompt me thinking in particular new ways that I might not have come to if I was just sitting there trying to think through a problem on my own. I like tarot as a kind of an invitation to reflection, and I journal a lot in this process. I know many of us do. I also use tarot for divination or for fortune telling. I'm pretty into the language of fortune telling, actually. I don't presume that the future is fixed, but I do operate on an assumption of certainly probabilities, some outcomes being much more likely than others, and the understanding that I can ask the tarot or some other divination system, if I keep going on my current trajectory, what are some potential outcomes, and I can explore that in that way. So there is definitely predictive aspects to the way that I work with tarot, for sure. I use tarot and other kinds of divination to ask very concrete questions. Where are the missing car keys is the example, that I will use. Though I will say that the last car key that was lost in my house, we never did find it. My partner is convinced that it somehow got thrown out in the garbage by accident, but that's a tangent. I will ask questions like that. That would be more of a geomancy question for me, but I will ask questions like that. I also use tarot in the context of my meditation practice. I will meditate on a particular card or on particular imagery in a card. And I also use tarot to create my Dungeons and Dragons characters, which I don't know if other people do this, but I found it actually quite helpful when trying to come up with a new D&D character and you're thinking about their backstory and their motivations, to do almost, a 9-card box spread or something like that with components of things like past and present and future and wants and, likes and dislikes and things like this. It's a fun way to come up with a character. And I think that if I ever really finally do attempt writing a bit of fiction, which I've never attempted, but I have fantasized about attempting, then I will use tarot to help me develop characters and plot points as well. I think that it's really well suited to that. Number 9, the question is your significator card and why you feel it represents you. So I don't tend to read with a significator card in tarot. And if I did, I would want to choose one that more so represents the question than that represents me. So if I was doing a reading about, I don't know, let's say work, I might decide that the question that I'm asking that relates to work would maybe be best represented by the 7 of Pentacles, because I'm, assessing something about my work. And so I might shuffle the deck and find that Seven of Pentacles and see what's on either side, and lay out the couple of cards that are before the Seven of Pentacles and the couple after, and see what's going on and affecting that work issue. But I don't so much do that with a card to represent myself. I don't tend to like the idea of taking a card out and having it, kind of predetermined what it will be. But if I was going to have a card to signify me, it would either be the Moon card, because I'm a Pisces and the Moon card goes with Pisces, or perhaps the Queen of Cups, which I also think of as kind of Piscean, I suppose. So I don't really read with them that way, though, so it's kind of hypothetical. Number 10 is, what is my most expensive tarot acquisition? Now, I have a spreadsheet, which I blame Kim at Abundant Life Tarot for my spreadsheet. Blame/thank. I think the spreadsheet is actually really useful. So I did actually know this information. And when I interpreted this question as the most expensive tarot acquisition, I interpreted that as just the most expensive single deck. So this is not necessarily, reflexive of Kickstarters where I've bought other items that are not the deck, right? Like sometimes there's a lot of extra stuff. I'm waiting on my Gentle Tarot deck and guidebook, and we ordered 2 tapestries for our living room, which I'm very excited about. But like that's a bunch of different items, so I didn't count that as an acquisition singular. The most I've ever spent on one deck is my limited edition large size Gaian Tarot by Joanna Powell Colbert. And this deck I got directly from Joanna. She signed the book. And I think that these are sold out now, but for a while she had them in 2 different sizes and I got the big one. And I spent, I'll just say, my most expensive I've ever spent on a deck. I spent $147 on the deck. And that just came with the deck, the guidebook that goes with the deck, and a pouch. Not this pouch. I bought a nicer one. But it came with a basic, kind of like a mesh bag to hold the cards as well. So this is my most expensive tarot acquisition at $147. And I just really, really wanted the matte cardstock that badly. So that's why this is the most expensive tarot acquisition, and why I decided that I would live with the idea of paying that much, which is a lot of money for a deck. Number 11 is the Unicorn deck, the deck that is so hard to find. I have 2 answers to this question. One is a nerdy answer, and one is a slightly more serious answer, I guess. So the nerdy answer is that there's a deck by artist Russell Fitzgerald. Russell Fitzgerald was a part of the San Francisco Renaissance. He created this deck in, I think, 1969, and the deck was known as the Nova deck, with reference to the novel Nova by Samuel Delany. And if you haven't read Samuel Delany, you should. And if you haven't read Nova, suffice to say that tarot figures into the novel quite prominently, and there's a tarot reading character in it. And Samuel Delany is fantastic, both as a science fiction author and as a memoirist. I really, really appreciate him. And so this deck by Russell Fitzgerald, that was the Nova deck, that's a Unicorn deck. I'll link below where you can see some cards from this deck. And I say that this is kind of like the nerdy, not too serious answer, because I love Delany, and I love the idea of this deck. It's not a deck that I would ever own. This is a deck that belongs in archives at this point, and that is where it lives. So it's not like, it's not a Unicorn deck in the sense that I'm actually trying to find a copy. But that, I would love to see it. I would love to see Russell Fitzgerald's deck. The Unicorn deck that's so hard to find that I would actually really like to have in my collection is the Delta Enduring Tarot by Egan. It's out of print. I don't pay the prices of out-of-print decks. I mean, the $147 for the Gaian Tarot was a huge stretch. Like, I've never even thought of spending that amount of money. on other decks just because they were out of print. I've heard rumor that the Delta Enduring Tarot might get a reprint. So I'm just going to wait until that happens and hope that that rumor does come true and that it will be a unicorn deck no longer. Question number 12. What is the most important lesson that the tarot has taught you? I think that the tarot has taught me to have a better relationship with my own intuition and to better understand my own intuition as a source of knowledge, as a capacity that I have for engaging with the world and knowing about the world and knowing about my place in the world and my future in the world and possibilities, and really developing that trust and the self-trust that I think is so central to me in terms of my being able to read tarot or other forms of divination for both myself and other people. And I feel like intuition as a kind of knowledge is very often devalued in the society that we live in. It's very often devalued in ways that are gendered, as being insufficiently rational way of knowing about the world. And I think that, that's easy to internalize in ways that are disempowering. So I would say that the tarot has taught me and has helped me to trust those kinds of knowings that are often, shoved to the side and not treated very seriously, right? And are trivialized or questioned or like they don't exist. So that is an important lesson that tarot has taught me. Question number 13, dinner party guests. A guest of honor and 2 other guests, dead or alive. Now, there are so many people that I would love to have dinner with. And depending on how wide I interpret this question, I would love to have dinner with Samuel Delany, who wrote a novel with tarot in it. I would love to chat with Samuel Delany. I got to go to a Zoom with Samuel Delany giving a talk and being interviewed in it, and I was like freaking out. And we didn't interact or anything, but I was just like, oh my goodness. I would love that. I would love to have dinner with Rachel Pollack, who, if you don't know, aside from being a tarot expert, is also a incredible science fiction author. So we share numerous different kinds of interests. Oh my goodness. I would love to have dinner with so many people. But really, I think I would love to have dinner with just folks that I've gotten to meet through tarot, and many of the folks that I've met through tarot, most of them by far, are folks that I have not gotten to meet in person. And so that's who I would choose, my tarot community pals. That is my answers to the tag All About Tarot 2022. Again, I've enjoyed everybody's VRs that I've seen. If you haven't made a VR yet, do consider it. And I will see you all again soon in my next video.